Friends, thank you for being here today. I appreciate you taking the time to pause, to listen, and to think critically about the world unfolding around us. We are living through a period of history that demands not just our attention, but our discernment. Many of you watching this have spent decades building your lives, raising families, contributing to your communities, and saving for a retirement that was supposed to be a time of peace and security. You have played by the rules. You have trusted the institutions. But deep down, I suspect you feel a shift, a gnawing sense that the ground beneath our economic feet is no longer solid. The numbers don't lie. They never do. And right now, the numbers are screaming a warning that the mainstream media is too distracted to broadcast. As we stand here in early 2026, the data paints a picture of a nation on the brink of a financial precipice, unlike anything we have seen in our lifetimes. Right now, 27% of Americans have absolutely zero emergency savings. Not a dollar, not a dime, nothing. 59% cannot cover a mere $1,000 emergency expense without borrowing money or going into debt. Perhaps most alarming for those of us who value prudence and preparation, the personal savings rate has collapsed to 4.4%, the lowest level in modern history. While cable news pundits argue about political theater, and while the younger generation scrolls through social media looking at curated vacation photos, the American middle class is being systematically dismantled. This is not happening by accident. It is being driven by macroeconomic forces that most people do not even know exist. This is not a prediction about some distant science fiction future. This is operational reality. It is unfolding across kitchen tables in Ohio, depleting bank accounts in Texas, and evaporating retirement portfolios that took 30 years of hard labor to build. My purpose today is not to frighten you. Fear is a useless emotion in the face of economic reality. My purpose is to arm you with the facts, the cold, brutal, undeniable mathematics that govern our current trajectory. When I walk you through the timeline when we connect the $38.43 trillion national debt to the devaluation of our currency. And when we look at the rise of the BRICS payment systems going live in 2027, you will understand why the statement 85% of Americans will be penniless is not hyperbole. It is a mathematical certainty. If you are holding dollars, if you are trusting the legacy system to protect you, or if you are waiting for a politician to save you, you are already too late. To understand the gravity of this situation, we must first examine the silent erosion of our wealth through the mathematics of inevitability. Let us begin with a question that is uncomfortable but necessary. How many paychecks away from homelessness is the average American right now? For 53% of the population, the answer is 2. They are living on a razor's edge with no buffer, no safety net, and absolutely no margin for error. One medical emergency, one major car repair, or one unexpected job loss is all it takes to plunge a family into ruin. For decades, we were told that this kind of financial fragility was a problem for the unskilled or the unlucky. But that narrative no longer holds water. Today, 32.3% of people earning over $100,000 per year are living paycheck to paycheck. Think about that for a moment. These are six-figure salaries, an income level that was once the gold standard of the American dream. And yet, these families cannot save money. Why? Because the cost of living is rising exponentially faster than wages. Because housing has become a speculative asset rather than a home. Because the purchasing power of the dollar is evaporating, while the official narrative pretends everything is fine. The Federal Reserve and government bureaus tell you that inflation is under control, perhaps hovering around 3%. But your grocery bill says otherwise. Your property tax assessment says otherwise. Your insurance premiums, which have likely doubled in recent years, say otherwise. Real inflation, the inflation you actually feel when you try to buy food, shelter, and transportation, is running at 8% to 12% annually. This is the silent thief. It means your money is losing value faster than you can possibly earn it in a standard savings account or a fixed income bond. I want to pause here and ask you, what are you seeing at your local grocery store? Is it the price of eggs, meat, or insurance that is hitting your budget the hardest? Please let me know in the comments below. Your real-world observations are often more accurate than the government's official CPI data, and I read through your experiences to understand the real picture. To understand why this is happening, we must look at the government's balance sheet. This is where the house of cards begins to tremble. The United States national debt has just crossed $38.43 trillion. Let me repeat that number so it sinks in, because numbers of this magnitude tend to lose their meaning. $38.43 trillion. To break that down into terms that matter, the debt is growing at a rate of $8.03 billion per day. That is $334 million every single hour. Every second that ticks by, the United States government is borrowing another $93,000 that it can never, ever repay. We have reached a point of mathematical singularity. The government is now spending $122 trillion per year just on interest payments. We are not paying down the principal. We are simply paying the rent on the money we have already spent. That is 13.85% of the entire federal budget vanishing into interest payments. Not building roads, not improving schools, not funding Social Security, and certainly not defending our borders. It is dead money, and that percentage is rising. By 2028, interest payments are projected to consume nearly 15% of the budget. This creates a debt spiral. It is the nightmare scenario for any entity, whether it is a household or a superpower. When you must borrow money just to pay the interest on the money you borrowed previously, you are insolvent. In January 2025, the debt was $36.18 trillion. 1 year later, it is $38.43 trillion. That is an increase of $2.25 trillion in 12 months. The Congressional Budget Office, which is historically optimistic, projects the debt will hit $41 trillion by 2027 and $50 trillion by 2030. Here's the part that nobody in Washington wants to say out loud, but which we, as adults, must acknowledge. This debt can never be repaid. It is mathematically impossible. You cannot tax your way out of $38 trillion. You cannot grow your way out of it when your GDP growth is dwarfed by your debt growth. The only way out, the only tool left in the toolkit, is inflation. The government must devalue the currency until the debt becomes manageable in nominal terms, even if the dollar becomes worthless in real terms. This means your savings, your pension, your Social Security checks, and your bond portfolio are the collateral damage. You are paying the price for their borrowing. They are inflating away the debt, which means they are inflating away your life's work. Now, let us bring this macro-level disaster down to the kitchen table, to the household crisis facing average families. We mentioned earlier that 27% of Americans have zero emergency savings. That represents 90 million people. These are not just numbers. These are our neighbors. It is not simply that people are irresponsible, though certainly cultural consumerism plays a role. The deeper truth is that they cannot afford to save. 73% of Americans report they are saving less due to inflation. Inflation is eating their paycheck before they can put anything aside. To bridge the gap, Americans have turned to credit. The average American with credit card debt now owes $7,321. But look at the interest rate, 22.83%. In previous generations, that was usury. Today, it is standard business practice. It is loan shark territory, and it is legal. Household debt has hit $18.59 trillion. We have a population that is overleveraged, undersaved, and facing a cost of living crisis that shows no sign of abating. When defaults start cascading, when people can no longer juggle the credit card payment, the car loan, and the mortgage, the banking system seizes up. We saw this in 2008. But there's a critical difference between 2008 and today. In 2008, the government had the capacity to bail out the banks. Today, the government itself is bankrupt. The Federal Reserve has already printed $15 trillion since 2020. They cannot print another $15 trillion to save the system without destroying the currency completely. But to truly understand why this time is different, we must look at the linchpin of the entire global economic order, the death of the dollar. For 80 years since the end of World War II, the United States has enjoyed an exorbitant privilege. Because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, we have been able to print money without immediate hyperinflation. Every country needed dollars to buy oil. Every central bank held dollars as a safety reserve. This created an artificial, bottomless demand for our currency. We could export our inflation to the rest of the world. But that era is ending. And it is ending faster than most experts predicted. In 2025, the dollar fell 9.1% against a basket of major currencies. That was the worst annual performance since 2017. The dollar index, which measures the greenback's strength, dropped from 109 to 99.8. Experts predict it will fall to 94 by mid-2026. Why? Because the Federal Reserve is trapped. They are cutting interest rates to try to save the commercial real estate market and the banks. But when interest rates go down, the value of the currency goes down. Foreign investors are looking at the US dollar with its negative real yield, and they are selling. However, the decline is not just cyclical, it is structural. The world is actively building a replacement for the dollar. We must talk about BRICS. This coalition, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has expanded to include major energy producers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran. Together, these nations represent nearly 48% of the global population and 37% of global GDP. For years, Western analysts dismissed BRICS as a talk shop. That was a fatal miscalculation. BRICS has built an alternative financial system. It is not a plan, it is a reality. The BRICS pay system is live. It connects Russia's financial messaging system, China's CAPS, and India SUPI into a unified network that bypasses the US dollar and the SWIFT system entirely. Russia and China now settle 90% of their trade in rubles and yuan. India is buying oil in rupees. Billions of dollars in trade have vanished from the dollar system. In October 2025, BRICS launched the unit. This is the game changer. It is a digital settlement currency backed 40% by gold and 60% by a basket of national currencies. It is designed specifically for cross-border trade. It allows a company in Shanghai to pay a supplier in Sao Paulo without ever touching a US dollar and without the US government being able to sanction the transaction. Why does this matter to you, sitting in your living room in America? It matters because the value of the dollar in your wallet depends on foreign countries wanting to hold dollars. If BRICS nations, who control the world's commodities, manufacturing, and gold, stop using dollars, all those billions of dollars currently overseas will come flooding back to the United States. When the supply of dollars domestically explodes while the demand internationally collapses, you get hyperinflation. Everything we import, and remember, we import 70% of what we consume, will skyrocket in price. We import our electronics from Asia, our car parts from Mexico, our clothes from Vietnam. If those countries demand payment in gold, yuan, or the unit, the US dollar's purchasing power will fall off a cliff. We are facing a resource nationalism on a scale we have never seen. This is a controversial topic, and I am genuinely curious about your perspective. Do you believe the US government has the power to reverse this trend, or is the rise of the BRICS alliance inevitable at this point? Share your thoughts in the comments. It's important we have this discussion. So, what does the road ahead look like? Let me walk you through the timeline to 2027 so you can see how these dominoes fall one by one. January 2026. We are here. The dollar is weakening. BRICS Pay is operational. American savings are at historic lows. The government is borrowing $8 billion a day just to keep the lights on. First quarter, 2026. The Federal Reserve continues to cut rates to prop up the housing market and the banks. As rates fall, the dollar drops to 96 on the index. BRICS trade in local currencies increases to 75% of their intra-block commerce. Crucially, China announces it will accept yuan for all oil purchases from the Middle East. This is the official death of the petrodollar, the arrangement set up in the 1970s that kept the dollar supreme. Second quarter, 2026, the dollar hits 94. Inflation in the US, which the Fed claimed was transitory or controlled, starts rising again. This is not demand pull inflation. This is currency devaluation inflation. Imports cost more. The Fed is trapped. If they raise rates to save the dollar, they crash the economy and bankrupt the US government, which can't afford higher interest on the debt. If they keep cutting rates, the dollar collapses. They will choose to keep cutting because they fear a recession more than they fear inflation. This is the wrong choice, but it is the political choice. Third quarter 2026. The dollar falls to 91. BRICS announces that the unit is fully operational for all member countries. 25% of global trade is now happening outside the dollar system. In the US, real inflation hits 12%. Wages cannot keep up. The middle class begins defaulting on debts in record numbers. Fourth quarter of 2026. The dollar sits at 88. 40% of Americans now have zero savings. Credit card defaults spike to 8%. Regional banks start reporting massive losses and begin to fail. The Fed announces emergency measures, printing more money to provide liquidity. But the problem isn't liquidity, the problem is solvency. The money is worthless. First quarter 2027. This is the breaking point. The dollar index falls to 84. BRICS announces that the unit is available for private transactions, not just government trade. This triggers capital flight. Smart money, wealthy investors, corporations, family offices, starts moving liquidity out of the dollar and into gold, yuan, or the unit. They are seeking a lifeboat. Simultaneously, the U.S. Treasury tries to sell bonds to fund the government, but foreign buyers go on strike. China isn't buying. Japan isn't buying. Saudi Arabia isn't buying. To prevent the U.S. government from defaulting, the Federal Reserve steps in as the buyer of last resort. They print trillions of dollars to buy the Treasury bonds. This is called monetizing the debt. It is the final stage before hyperinflation. Second quarter 2027, the dollar drops to 78. Official inflation is 15%. Real inflation is 25%. Gas is $9 a gallon. Bread is $8 a loaf. Rent has doubled. The middle class is liquidating retirement accounts just to buy food. 60% of Americans have zero savings. Unemployment spikes because businesses cannot operate with costs rising 20% every quarter. Third quarter 2027. The dollar has lost 50% of its value since early 2026. This is where we reach the statistic. 85% of Americans are effectively penniless. At this point, it is crucial that we define exactly what we mean when we use the word penniless. I do not mean that 85% of the population will be homeless on the street. I mean that 85% of the population will have lost their economic sovereignty. They will have zero savings. Their assets, houses, cars, may nominally be worth more dollars, but they cannot sell them because no one can afford the loans. Their debts remain fixed, but their wages buy half of what they used to. A savings account that had $10,000 in 2026 now buys only $5,000 worth of goods. But that is an optimistic scenario. Most people didn't have the $10,000 to begin with. They had debt. And in a collapsing economy, they will default. They will become entirely dependent on government subsidies paid in a worthless currency just to survive. It is a grinding poverty. It is the destruction of the middle-class dream. It is the realization that you worked for 40 years for a retirement that has been stolen from you by inflation. This is the greatest wealth transfer in human history. It is not being done through taxes. It is being done through currency debasement. You might be wondering if this has ever happened before. The answer is yes, and the historical parallel to Rome is chilling. That we have seen this before. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. Consider the Roman Empire. The backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius. In 64 AD, the denarius was 94% pure silver. It was sound money. But the empire became bloated. It had endless wars to fund, a massive bureaucracy to pay, and a populace that demanded bread and circuses, welfare and entertainment. Politicians found that raising taxes caused revolts, so they chose the hidden tax, debasement. By 265 AD, the denarius contained only 0.05% silver. It was a copper coin with a thin wash of silver paint. It was a lie. The result? Prices increased by 1,000%. The savings of the Roman middle class were wiped out. The economy collapsed into a primitive barter system. The legions, the military, refused to accept the currency, demanding payment in gold or land. When the army stops accepting the money, the empire dies. Rome fell into 3 centuries of darkness. We are watching the exact same pattern. In 1971, the US dollar was backed by gold. Then President Nixon closed the gold window. Since then, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. It is backed by nothing but faith and credit. But when the government is borrowing $8 billion a day, that faith is gone. The dollar is the modern denarius. We are in the final stages of the cycle. However, friends, there's a modern twist that Rome did not have to contend with. And this is perhaps the most critical chapter of our warning today, one that explains why so many smart, capable people will walk blindly into this trap. It is the psychological phenomenon known as normalcy bias, coupled with the government's technological solution, the central bank digital currency, or CBDC. Normalcy bias is the mental state people enter when facing a disaster. It causes the brain to underestimate the possibility of a catastrophe and its effects. We think, things have always been this way, so they will always be this way. You see the stock market at all-time highs and assume the economy is healthy. But this is an illusion. In the Weimar Republic in 1923, the stock market soared. In nominal terms, investors were becoming millionaires overnight, but the price of bread was rising even faster. The gains were a mirage caused by a dying currency. If you're looking at your 401k today and feeling secure because the numbers are up, you're falling for the same illusion. You're measuring your wealth in a yardstick, the dollar, that is shrinking every single day. The numbers are going up, but your purchasing power is going down. And the government knows this. They know the dollar is reaching its end of life. They are not planning to fix it. They are planning to replace it. This is where the digital trap comes in. When the crisis hits in 2027, when the banks freeze and the paper dollar is rejected abroad, the government will offer a solution. They will introduce a central bank digital currency, likely marketed as a digital dollar or Fed coin. They will tell you it is for your safety. They will promise instant stimulus checks, stabilized prices, and convenience. But this digital currency is fundamentally different from the money you know. It is programmable. Executive Order 114067, signed in 2022, laid the groundwork for this. A CBDC gives the central bank total control over your spending. They can implement negative interest rates, effectively taxing your savings if you don't spend them fast enough. They can put expiration dates on your money to force consumption. They can limit what you can buy, how much gas, how much meat, or where you can travel, based on a carbon footprint score or social compliance. This is the ultimate trap for the 85%. When the collapse happens, desperate people will accept any solution that promises to put food on the table. They will trade their financial privacy and freedom for a digital allowance. They will swap their worthless paper dollars for programmable digital tokens, locking themselves into a system of total surveillance. The 85% will be penniless, not just because they have no money, but because they have no control over their money. They will be dependents of the state. This brings me to a critical question for this community, and I want you to be honest in the comments. If the government introduces a digital dollar to replace cash, will you use it or will you refuse it? Type yes or no below. I want to see where we stand as a group. This is why the window to prepare is so narrow. Once the switch is flipped to a digital system, the exit doors are sealed. You cannot opt out of a digital grid unless you have positioned yourself beforehand. This leads us to the most important question of all. How do you ensure you are on the right side of this divide? This grim reality leads us to a critical distinction: the 85% who lose everything versus the 15% who survive. I said that 85% will be penniless. That leaves 15% who will survive and perhaps even thrive. Who are they? They are not necessarily the ultra-rich, though the billionaires have certainly prepared. You see it in the news. 142,000 millionaires fled Western countries in 2025, the largest wealth migration in history. They moved to Singapore, Switzerland, Dubai, and New Zealand. They are buying bunkers, farmland, and gold. They know the math. But you do not need to be a billionaire to be in the 15%. You simply need to be awake. The 15% are those who understand that wealth is not disappearing, it is transferring. It is moving from paper assets, currency, bonds, savings accounts, to hard assets, gold, silver, land, commodities. When the currency dies, the purchasing power has to go somewhere. It flows into things that cannot be printed. So the question remains, what is the strategy for prudence in such uncertain times? I'm not a financial advisor, and I cannot give you specific investment advice. But I can tell you what prudent people throughout history have done when facing a currency collapse. First, you must reduce debt. Debt is a chain around your neck. In a high inflation environment, fixed rate debt, like a 3% mortgage, can technically be an asset because you pay it back with cheaper dollars. However, variable rate debt, credit cards, adjustable loans, is a death sentence. Pay off high interest debt immediately. Become as anti-fragile as possible. Second, you must diversify out of dollars. This is the most critical step. Do not keep 100% of your life's energy stored in a vessel that has a leak. Consider gold and silver. These are not investments to get rich. They are insurance. They are God's money. They have held value for 5,000 years. Central banks are buying gold at record rates. Do what they do, not what they say. Also, consider real assets. If you have the means, own things that exist in the physical world: land, real estate that generates income, tools, equipment, and don't ignore foreign exposure. Consider assets that are not denominated in US dollars. Third, you need to build resilience. This is not about being a doomsday prepper. It is about being a responsible adult. If supply chains break down because the dollar can't buy imports, you need a buffer. Keep 3 to 6 months of food, water, and essential medicine. If you rely on a prescription, try to get an extra supply. This gives you peace of mind. When the panic hits, you won't be fighting in a grocery store aisle. You will be at home, safe with your family. Fourth, focus on increasing your value. In a depression, income is king. If you're retired, look for ways to generate value that isn't dependent on a pension check. If you're working, ensure your skills are essential. Fifth, build community. This is often overlooked. When money fails, relationships are the only currency that matters. Build a network of people you trust, people you can trade with, learn from, and rely on. The lone wolf dies, the pack survives. In conclusion, friends, let us be clear about where we stand. I know this is heavy information. The temptation is to look away, to call it doom-mongering, and to hope that the government has a secret plan to fix it. But hope is not a strategy, and denial is not a shield. In 2007, if someone told you the housing market would collapse and take down the global economy, you might have called them crazy, but it happened. In 2020, if someone told you the world would shut down and the Fed would print trillions overnight, you would have said, impossible. But it happened. The impossible keeps happening because the system is fundamentally broken. We are in a doom loop of debt and printing. 2027 is the convergence point. It is the year the BRICS system matures. It is the year the debt math becomes unmanageable. It is the year the window closes. 85% of people will do nothing. They will read the headlines, shrug, and go back to sleep. They will be the ones standing in line angry and confused when the bank holidays are declared. Don't be the 85%. Be the 15% who saw the storm clouds, who read the charts, and who took action to protect their legacy. The final warning has been sounded. The clock is ticking. The future belongs to the prepared. Before you go, I invite you to leave a comment below with one step you're taking today to prepare. Your advice might help someone else reading the comments who is just waking up to this reality. We are in this together. Thank you.